20 half company. Halt. 20 half company, into line, right, turn. 20 half company, shoulder on. 20 half company, with pass arm intervals, right, dress. Eyes front. 20 half company. Form 2. Right. 20 half company. Slow. On. 20 half company. Front rank only. Quick. March. Front rank only. Halt.
Guard of honor. Standard. Easy. Guard of honor. Stand. Easy.
King and the Queen in residence at the moment. They will then depart Buckingham Palace in the Diamond Jubilee state coach. They will make their way alongside those processed members of the armed forces to the Houses of Commons. The ceremonial search of the cellars by the members of the Yeomen of the Guard has already taken place. And this is all going to begin in half an hour's time. In a few minutes, the Imperial State Crown will also make its way through the Sovereign's entrance in the Queen Alexandra's state coach, accompanied by members of His Majesty's Bargemaster and Watermen. And this is going to be where the government of Sir Keir Starmer will put forward 30 to 35 pieces of legislation for the year ahead. And of course, this all comes following the drama and developments of yesterday, as we see this live shot from the Sky News helicopter looking down on a slightly damp Westminster this morning. Well, we're going to have all of the details, the developments, the insight and analysis being brought to you by Sophie Ridge from 10:30 and also on the Sky News website and the Sky News app. Stick with us for the full story first of the upcoming King's Speech here on Sky News.
Brilliant, thank you. Huh? Yep.
Good morning. You are watching Sky News on another major day here in Westminster as we build up to this morning's King's Speech. Coming up in the next hour, we'll have special coverage as the monarch prepares to leave Buckingham Palace to lay out the government's plans for the next year. And of course, it's all against the backdrop of leadership uncertainty over the future of Keir Starmer.
What did you say to the Prime Minister?
Did you ask the Prime Minister to resign?
This morning, he held that brief meeting with his potential rival, Wes Streeting, amid the intrigue over what will come next. We'll bring you all the latest live from Downing Street as it remains unclear whether the Prime Minister will even be in the top job to oversee the new measures. And of course, we'll bring you all the latest live from Westminster on the politics, the pageantry and the pressure. Good morning. Welcome to another big day here in Westminster, where the government's agenda for the coming year will be set out in the King's Speech in about an hour's time. It comes, of course, as Keir Starmer fights for his leadership, and it remains unclear if he'll survive in office long enough to oversee his full legislative programme. This morning, the Prime Minister has had a face-to-face meeting with one of his key rivals for the Labour leadership, the Health Secretary, Wes Streeting.
Are you going to resign? What are you going to say to the Prime Minister, Health Secretary?
Are you going to stand for leader? Are you going to challenge the Prime Minister?
He was out of there just 16 minutes later, barely time for an espresso. This time as well, he was tight-lipped.
You resign, Mr. Streeting.
What did you say to the Prime Minister?
Did you ask the Prime Minister to
Have you got the
resign?
numbers? Have you bought
Are you going to resign, Mr. Streeting?
Do you want the job or not?
Keir Starmer just leaving.
Number 10. Prime Minister's your time up. Have you lost the country, Prime Minister?
Is your time over?
Are you finished, Mr. Starmer?
Very poorly timed outburst of rain there. I think that's pathetic fallacy in action, perhaps, as the Prime Minister leaves Downing Street to travel to the Houses of Parliament ahead of this huge state occasion. We can bring in our political correspondent, Ali Forsky, who's in Downing Street for us. Ali, we just saw the Prime Minister leaving.
Yeah, that's right. The Prime Minister and his wife, Victoria, leaving for the King's Speech. We asked him, was he going to survive this? He didn't answer. You never know. We don't just chat those questions for the sake of it. Yesterday, we saw a number of cabinet ministers coming out of Downing Street and directly to the cameras to talk to us. But he is carrying on with business as usual. I should say, as you can see, it started absolutely pouring it down with rain just as he came out of number 10. Is that an omen of things to come? Because this speech, Sophie, comes in a absolutely extraordinary context where yesterday we weren't sure if the Prime Minister was going to make it through the day. 80 plus MPs on his own side publicly calling for him to go. 100 plus MPs signing a letter there. I should say they didn't all know that their name was going to be used, saying that he should stay. The Labour Party split down the middle. We don't know what those other 200 odd MPs left are going to do. They will be watching closely, but this is a Prime Minister clinging on to authority, trying to crack on with business as usual, but it is not business as usual. The Health Secretary, Wes Streeting, was in here earlier today for about 16 minutes. This is a man who allies say has not been plotting but planning should there be a vacancy for the leadership. We know that he tried to speak to the Prime Minister yesterday after Cabinet. We understand that didn't happen. After the Prime Minister effectively did a John Major said put up or shut up. There's no leadership contest yet, and until that happens, I'm cracking on. Well, what did Wes Streeting say to the Prime Minister today? These can't have been kind of long policy discussions, long peace talks, if you like, because I think the timing is very interesting, only 15 minutes. What was discussed between those two men? Sources close to Wes Streeting saying that we're not going to hear anything. He doesn't want to disrupt the King's speech. And of course, you know, there is a great deal of pageantry and pomp. This is the historic opening of Parliament that we see at the start of a parliamentary session. I think people do not want to interrupt that and the moment, and we know the King processing, of course, to Parliament. No one wants to interrupt that. And of course, this, you know, is meant to be a moment of clarity, the government setting out its long-term agenda. But how long is this government going to be in power? We will get through the King's speech, but what happens next, I think, is extremely uncertain. How the next few days will play out. It is clear that the Prime Minister is going to fight this, is defiant. We saw cabinet ministers coming out. We saw the Deputy Prime Minister coming to the cameras yesterday saying that there's been no leadership challenge, trying to draw a line under this. But how long will he be able to survive with a number of MPs publicly saying they don't back him? They can't unsay what they've said. And we've also passed a threshold at which they could potentially defeat parliamentary legislation if they wanted. They could rally behind one candidate and get them on the ballot for a leadership. So things are moving quickly still in Westminster, but a reprieve, really, I think, for the Prime Minister with this King's speech.
Thank you, Ali. Well, we're looking now at live pictures of Buckingham Palace. We're expecting, of course, the King to leave Buckingham Palace in the Diamond Jubilee State Coach in around half an hour's time, just under half an hour's time, around 11 o'clock. And we've seen, of course, there the Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, departing Downing Street for the House of Lords. It is a major moment in the parliamentary calendar. It is a time of great pomp and pageantry, as Ali was saying. We're seeing some of that there, of course, outside Buckingham Palace right now. Let's bring in our political editor, Beth Rigby, shall we? And Beth, you know, as if things weren't tense enough for Keir Starmer, the SNP has just announced it intends to table a no-confidence motion in the Prime Minister.
Yeah, look, I think what we're going to have is, for the next few hours, we're going to have this very major moment, the state opening of Parliament, where the King will come to the House of Lords. He will lay out the government's legislative agenda for the next phase of this parliamentary session. And then it's back to the Commons, and I think then it's going to be back to the raw politics of the absolutely extraordinary drama that has rolled out the past few days. And yes, the SNP saying that they intend to table a motion of no confidence in the Prime Minister. That's clearly embarrassing and designed to embarrass him because, as we know, nearly 90 MPs have publicly come out and said that they don't have any confidence in him. So, you know, what are they going to do? Are they going to vote for that motion or not? So they've got all of that to contend with. Equally, there's over 100 MPs that have come out in support of him. So I think once we get through the state opening of Parliament and through that pageantry and that session, then it goes back to the Commons. Kemi Badenoch will be in the Commons, Keir Starmer will be in the Commons, and I think it could get back into the raw politics of this very quickly. If you were Kemi Badenoch, what would you ask him? Why are you laying an agenda down when you're probably not going to be Prime Minister in the next even few days? I mean, that's going to be presumably the argument she will make.
I mean, it is extraordinary to think about the backdrop of it. And we, of course, will bring you, the full pomp and pageantry that we're seeing. The ceremonial search of the cellars has already taken place. We're going to be seeing the imperial state crown arriving at the sovereign entrance as a reminder of those days when it was brought from the Tower of London. This is a day of deep history, a time of the monarchy and a time, of course, of stability, which for many people is what the monarchy really represents, that these traditions going on for hundreds of years, and yet it comes at a time of deep instability for the government.
Yeah, and Sophie, I was reflecting on this morning because in normal times, you and I would have been looking at this, thinking about this, looking at the content of the King's speech, discussing the legislation that the government were bringing in, discussing the work of government and actual policy. And we haven't even looked at the King's speech, the truth be told. And it's not because of want of trying, it's because we've all been completely consumed by the leadership drama of the Labour Party. And I just find that extraordinary, and I think it says a lot about where we are at the moment in terms of this government and how they are governing, because there are a number of bills but they're not being discussed at all.
It's extraordinary. What you're looking at on your screen now is the imperial state crown, the cap of maintenance, the sort of state, arriving in the Queen Alexandra's state coach, accompanied, as you can see there, by His Majesty's barge master and waterman as a reminder of the days when it was brought down the River Thames from the Tower of London. On arrival, when it gets there, the crown, the cap of maintenance, the sword, all of that will be then carried up to the Royal Gallery under escort by two gentlemen at arms. So we are in the deep historical context right now. You can see the crown there being carried in the Alexandra state coach on your screens now. But we know that Buckingham Palace has been sounding out, I guess, Westminster number 10, just to check that this is all, you know, the King is not going to be embarrassed, that it's all going to go ahead as planned. It is a very unusual context,
yeah,
I think.
mean, it says a lot when Buckingham Palace has to check with the government that the King should still be coming to Parliament for the state opening, where he opens Parliament for the next parliamentary session. I mean, that just speaks in one. It's just completely, entirely illustrative of the situation that the government is in. And I thought it was, I mean, Wes Streeting went into into Downing Street this morning. He was in and out in 16 minutes, so he must have been with the Prime Minister for, what, 10 minutes?
It's unbelievable.
That was not a long conversation about how he's going to put the government back together or what Wes Streeting would like reassurance from Keir Starmer about. We do not know what was discussed in that meeting. Wes Streeting's allies have made it very clear that the Health Secretary does not want to distract from the King's speech or embarrass the monarch in any way. And so actually from both sides, from Downing Street and from the Health Secretary's side, despite many phone calls, no one is discussing that right now, and you wouldn't expect them to. But what did happen in that meeting? You know, it was quite clear to me last night that allies of the PM and number 10 were pushing quite hard, that they didn't think Wes Streeting had the numbers, that this attempt to oust Keir Starmer had fizzled out, that Wes Streeting, to quote one, was going to bottle it. When you speak to the other side, that's not clear. And actually, some of Wes Streeting's allies have left government and might well expect him to also take a stand, as they have done. It's really uncertain what's going to happen, whether it does just pause and calm down or whether it ratchets up in the next 12 to 24 hours. But we're pausing on that for the moment, for this moment, which is when King Charles comes to Parliament to address the Lords, to read out the government's agenda. It's the second time I think he's done this as monarch, isn't it? He did it back in July 2024. And this is where he's going to lay out the government's agenda with a number of pieces of legislation. In terms of what the Prime Minister's going to say over this King's speech, he will say the public expect the government to get on with the job of changing the country for the better. He will say Britain stands at a pivotal moment to press ahead with a plan to build a stronger, fairer country, turn back on the chaos and instability of the past. But that chaos and instability seems very, very present at the moment.
At this moment, let's bring in Laura Bundock, our royal correspondent, who is watching by. Laura, just talk us through what we can expect from the King's perspective today and what we're witnessing now.
I mean, this is the ceremony that goes with what is a very ceremonial day. This today is one of the King's constitutional roles. He is, of course, head of state, and the duty falls to him to officially open Parliament and then read the King's speech. And this ceremony is a very kind of theatrical way of demonstrating the three strands of Parliament, the Commons, the Lords and the Monarch, and they're all coming together today. But the King's role, very much a ceremonial one. He, of course, doesn't write the speech. It's drafted by the government, setting out the government's plans. The King won't debate, he won't vote on the speech, and as ever, sits above politics, which I think it's fair to say feels odd. It's a paradox, isn't it, given he is centre stage today at this very political moment. But he simply reigns, he doesn't rule, and he has to always act on the advice of his government. A lot has been said, is it putting the King in a tricky position today? And I think the simple answer is no. He acts on the advice of his government. The Parliament has to be opened, and that is his role. There's been a lot of suggestion as to whether or not Buckingham Palace was asking whether it should happen today. And I think, look, they won't be asking in a way of suggesting it shouldn't be taking place, but there are always conversations between the Palace and Number 10. Remember, the Prime Minister has a weekly audience with the King, and don't think for a second that as the door is closed, they just stand there in silence. The King's private secretary will be speaking to the Prime Minister's team as well, and it would only make sense that tricky issues come up, such as what happens if there isn't, what happens if Keir Starmer is stood down at this point. You know, I think from a procedural point of view, there's so much going on today that the Palace will want to know it's happening. What would the plan B be, for example? But they won't have got involved with the actual decision-making. Is it embarrassing for the King? Well, he's going to stand there in the Lords reading out a speech, which is mostly written by Number 10, setting out the government's plans, when I think we all know, everyone in that room will be wondering how much longer we're going to have this Prime Minister, how much longer we'll be having this cabinet. So I think it's, for me, a day where pomp meets pantomime always, but perhaps that sense of pantomime is even greater today, given what's going on.
Laura, hard to argue with that. Laura Bundalk there, who's going to be with us throughout the morning. We can bring in now someone who knows an awful lot about events like this, the former Black Rod Lieutenant General David Leakey. Great to have you with us today. So what are we looking at now?
So, in the run-up to the King's speech and the arrival of the King, there are various key events that happen in the House of Lords. And the first thing is, and this harks back to the history of this ceremony, which has been going on for centuries, and that is the presence of the Crown and the King and the security around that. It would be dreadful if something happened to the Crown. The Crown and the other symbols of state arrive in their own carriage, protected by an escort of the household cavalry. And when the Crown and those symbols of state, and then the sovereign himself and the Queen arrive, they're protected, of course, by the Metropolitan Police, but they're also protected by these ceremonial elements, the household cavalry, other units of the household division, and also within the Palace of Westminster, the Yeomen of the Guard and the Gentlemen at Arms. And these are completely ceremonial. Although, believe me, in the contingency plans for something going wrong or happening, I can tell you they all have a role to play, and they would help with the organisation and the contingency plans if something went wrong. So they all have a ceremonial role, but they all have good common sense to help out if something were ever to happen.
It's at moments like this, I always feel a deep sense of the kind of history and the breadth and depth of the stability, I guess, that the royal family, Parliament, all of these things that make up our country provide when juxtaposed with the politics. But it feels like today that is even more brought into relief.
You're right, and I think one of the key things that this country has, and when you look at, and I've lived abroad in many other places, which other countries don't have in the same way, is that the political turmoil, when it happens in a country, in a nation, doesn't have as many solid constitutional anchor points that we do have in this country. We've had stable democracy in this country for centuries, and part of that is underpinned by the stability and the constitutional pillars. And we don't see very many of those. Some people refer to them as the deep state, but they're there. And it's a bit like the way markers as you go into, if you're a mariner, those anchor buoys and the radar signals that keep ships and ships' channels open. And it's the same here. We've got these ceremonial anchor points, which are the legacy of the stability of our parliamentary democracy, and they're there. And in a way, they symbolise the stability of our constitution, not necessarily our politics, but at least our constitution.
And we're looking at scenes now from the red benches rather than the green benches of the House of Lords. A few former politicians on the screens there, Luciana Berger, Aisha Hazarika, everyone dressed up in full finery today for the occasion.
Now, here's something that's really important to say about the House of Lords. If ever you see a news item or a news bulletin or a picture in the newspaper about the House of Lords, a scandal or some important bit of legislation, or the House of Lords is blocking Parliament's, the passage of legislation, you see a picture and you only see this picture, which is the House of Lords on the day of state opening with all the peers in their red robes and ermine. They wear that for 1 hour a year, and yet it's the only picture you ever see of the House of Lords. On a daily basis, the House of Lords looks strikingly similar to the House of Commons. People in, what do you call it, business attire, I think, men and women wearing suits and ordinary clothes, conducting business in an ordinary way, in exactly the same way as they do in legislative chambers globally, worldwide. And the House of Lords is no different in that sense. But this is the sort of jamboree day, I suppose, where everybody does dress up. But this jamboree lasts for 1 hour a year. I think it's such a... I mean, in a way, it's sort of rather nice, I suppose, that whenever the House of Lords gets a mention, up comes a picture of all the peers sitting in serried ranks in their red robes.
Well, they're not elected, though, are they? So in that way, they are very different to other...
They're not elected, but then nor do they decide on the legislation of our country. The House of Commons, which is elected, always decides, and people don't understand that either. The House of Lords is has a very influential role in the Constitution on legislation, and they're appointed, and they're usually appointed for either their political experience and skills or the other experience and skills which they bring, lots of skills which very often the House of Commons doesn't have, and the House of Lords therefore plays a really important role in improving and editing and amending legislation. But legislation at the end of the day always has to go back to the House of Commons for final sort of sign-off by the political, democratically elected chamber.
We've seen them flexing their muscles recently as well, of course, when you look at the assisted dying bill and also
they talked out, and that bill was a private member's bill, but they talked it out and it fell.
And how often does that happen a year? Once or twice a year over a bill like that. I think much more important is to ask the question, how many amendments to bills do the House of Lords make in a year, and how many of those are approved by the House of Commons? And the answer is well over 90%, and well into the thousands of amendments which wouldn't happen if a chamber like the House of Lords wasn't there.
So that is the Alexandra's state coach with the imperial state crown in it. The horses trotting through Westminster there, you can see. Taking that to the sovereign. Beth, it's a moment of pomp and pageantry in history, but it's also a moment of policy, isn't it? Right? This is about the government's legislation as well. Yeah,
it is, and actually the government are going to bring forward 35 different bills in this King's speech. That is the agenda that they want to get through Parliament for the next session. Some of the big bills that are going to be highlighted, I think, as we go through, as the King reads them out, will be immigration reforms, which have been controversial on the Labour benches. There's going to be the steel nationalisation bill. That's to try and set an agenda, set down a timetable, and the legislation to potentially bring the Scunthorne plant back under national control, that the government in an emergency session in Parliament kept going because it looked like the private owner was going to close it. There's going to be a European partnership bill, and if you watch the Prime Minister's speech on Monday morning, you might have heard him talk about having closer ties with Europe. So he's going to talk about trying to improve trade ties through the European Partnership Bill. There will be an education bill, and that will be to try and push through the government's special educational needs reforms for school. Again, a controversial package. And there's going to be a social housing renewal bill that will be around the legislation to give leaseholders more rights. But the reason I pick out a couple of them, which would be immigration and education, is because based on what's going on with the Labour Party and Keir Starmer's government at the moment, there's an obvious question about what bills can he actually get through the House of Commons at the moment, because the Special Educational Needs Bill is controversial, the immigration's controversial. Does he have the support?
So what we're seeing now is the imperial state crown arriving at the sovereign's entrance there. The current crown jeweller, I'm told, is a man called Mark Appleby, appointed by Queen Elizabeth II back in 2017, the 10th holder of the position. So a very important kind of ceremonial role there as well. The cap of maintenance also arriving, and the sword of state too, a symbol of royal authority, like David Leakey was just explaining there. It's also carried at coronations to a steel blade with a silver gilt hilt. That now arriving there at the sovereign's entrance, ready for the monarch.
Yes, and traditionally what happens is the imperial state crown is, as you can see on the pictures, taken out of the coach by the jeweller.
So that's the jeweller there, is it?
Yes.
Oh, wow.
And he takes it out. He's responsible for its condition. And what you will see happening is, in fact, you may not see happening, is the crown is taken into the Palace of Westminster, and then it's very quickly taken into a side room at the bottom of the grand entrance stairs, and it's given a last touching up to make sure there are no finger marks on the jewels.
So a bit of a polish.
It's a ceremonial act by the crown jeweller, and yes, it goes in there. Not for very long, only a few seconds. It gets a final dusting, and then it's carried up to the robing room by the controller.
I mean, I was actually in Parliament before it opened earlier in the week, and I saw Black Rod, and they were practising. You know, they were just practising, because it has to be absolutely precise. Nothing can go wrong, and they were just walking through the whole ceremony to make sure that everything just went exactly as it should.
And it has to be done like that for the television programme,
yes,
and the adverts and global television.
So just looking there, is that the cap of maintenance?
That is the cap of maintenance.
On the short baton?
On the short baton, exactly that. And the cap of maintenance is one of those symbols of state that sort of represents, I think it represents the sort of financial and treasury aspects of the state.
And there's the crown itself.
That is being held by the person who is known as the controller in Buckingham Palace, and it is then taken up the steps into the Palace of Westminster.
And it goes to, where does it go then? To a sort of dressing room, effectively?
It goes the robing room, and the robing room is one of the grand rooms in the House of Lords end of the Palace of Westminster, where, when the sovereign arrives, the sovereign, as we'll see later, arrives in the coach, goes up in through the same entrance and up the stairs into the robing room, and it is in the robing room that the sovereign puts on the imperial state crown and the state robes, so it's aptly known. What people don't know is that until 1965, the Palace of Westminster was an entirely royal palace, still under the control and ownership and management of the sovereign. And it was Queen Elizabeth II who, it was her idea, proposed to Harold Wilson, who was the Prime Minister at the time, suggested that it was inappropriate that the sovereign should control and manage the Palace of Westminster. So she handed over control and management of the palace, respectively, to the House of Commons and the House of Lords, and it was done by a statement on the chambers, and architectural drawings were made out, all edged in red and green, showing which was which. But the Queen retained, or the Queen retained for the sovereigns in perpetuity, the robing room and the royal gallery. The robing room, because that's where the sovereign gets robed for the state opening. The royal gallery, because that's where the state procession goes. and that's at the House of Lords end. And at the House of Commons end, the Westminster Hall, because that's where the lying in state of a sovereign takes place, and that should be kept under state rather than parliamentary control. We saw that when the late Queen was lying in state there. So the Palace of Westminster is actually controlled and managed by three elements: the House of Commons, the House of Lords, and the Sovereign, which represents the three elements of the constitutional legislature. And that's symbolic of today as well, because it is the only time in the year when all three elements of the constitutional legislature come together in one place, in fact, in one room. The Crown, the Commons and the Lords, all in the House of Lords chamber, which we'll see in about half an hour's time.
Yeah, we're awaiting, of course, the departure of King Charles from Buckingham Palace, but there you can see on your screens the imperial state crown, everything being made ready for the arrival of the monarch. And that's now being passed over.
So it's passed over to the Lord Great Chamberlain. The Lord Great Chamberlain is one of the great officers of state. Funnily enough, it's a rotational hereditary appointment held by Lord Carrington at the moment, and he is responsible to the Queen for the ceremonial, along with the Earl Marshal, the Duke of Norfolk, responsible for the state ceremonial in the Palace of Westminster. And so he is very much there with the Earl Marshal, fronting up the state ceremonial. It is, of course, all managed by Black Rod, who, amongst other of his appointments, is secretary to the Lord Great Chamberlain.
We're looking now at Buckingham Palace. We can see, I believe, the departure of the King from Buckingham Palace. That is in the Diamond Jubilee state coach. And he's going to be making the short journey there alongside his wife, Queen Camilla. The weather's not quite shining on them today, is it? But a resplendent sight, of course, to see the coach there departing from Buckingham Palace, making its way to the Houses of Parliament, where the King will read out the government's legislative programme for the year ahead. Let's bring in Laura Bundock at this time, shall we? Our royal correspondent. And Laura, we can see there the departure of the King.
Yes, and one thing that always strikes me, or a couple of things, is perhaps one of the big ironies is that with all the splendour that you see with the King, with his arrival, with the robes he will be putting on, the crown being on display, you'd think there is power with that. But of course, the King himself only has ceremonial power. So this is very much the ceremonial role of the King, and a sort of a constitutional punctuation point in a political process where he will be reading the King's speech written by his government. This moment of custom, of convention, pantomime, I've always liked to call it, and I certainly think, given what's going on in Westminster at the moment, there is very much an element of that, perhaps, but he will be setting out the plans for the year ahead and formally opening Parliament. I mean, the monarch may change, governments obviously change, but the pageantry very much remains the same. It's an interesting moment, this. I mean, this kind of display certainly rankles Republicans everywhere, but it is a very grand moment, isn't it, as the King makes his way up the Mall in that coach with the Queen there. The speech, obviously not his words, the draft very much coming from his government. He has to sit above politics, which always feels odd, doesn't it, given that he is centre stage at what is a very political moment. But he reigns, he doesn't rule. That's what his government does, and he acts on the advice of his government. So any questions as to whether or not there was pushback from Buckingham Palace as to whether he should be brought into this moment, given the state of politics, particularly with the Prime Minister, I think can be put to one side. There will have been conversations, no doubt, between Number 10 and Buckingham Palace as to what was happening, given the situation, the volatility of the situation. But I think for this, certainly a moment where the King performs the duty that falls to him and officially opens Parliament. And this ceremony, you know, as we've been saying, is a reminder of the three strands of our Parliament. We have the Commons, the Lords, and the monarch coming together in this unique moment. Is it embarrassing for the King to be reading out a speech written by Number 10, setting out plans, when I think everyone in the room will be thinking about how much longer we will have this Prime Minister, how much longer we will have the Cabinet as it is at the moment? I don't know if it's embarrassing for the King, but it's certainly an extra dimension, perhaps, to what we are about to witness today.
We can see there the King and the Queen making their way towards Parliament, where they will be greeted by a 41-gun salute to signal the arrival by the King's Troop Royal Horse Artillery in Green Park. So making that short journey there, where he will put on the imperial state crown, the cap of maintenance, in the robing room.
And this is his second King's Speech, but didn't he, David, carry out the speech on behalf of his mother at one point when the late Queen was not really able to get to Parliament?
He did. He did it on one occasion, having on numerous occasions before that accompanied the Queen, either actually as her supporter and sitting on the accompanying throne alongside her in the House of Lords chamber, but very often, even when the Duke of Edinburgh came, Prince Charles came when he was the Prince of Wales, came in the procession, I suppose as part of his apprentice training, if one could put it that way. So he will be entirely comfortable with the role, having done it before, once as king and once on behalf of his mother. And in fact, in previous centuries, when Queen Victoria herself didn't always come, in fact, rarely came to the state opening of Parliament, the speech was read out by others on her behalf. I think, if memory serves me right, I think it was the Lord Chancellor who used to read it out. And nowadays, it's the Lord Chancellor who has the King's speech in his satchel, ceremonial satchel. And when the King has taken his seat on the throne and the MPs have finally arrived, the Lord Chancellor steps forward and presents the King with his speech from the Lord Chancellor's satchel. And the contingency is for this, if the King doesn't make it for any reason, then the speech can still be read out in Parliament because it's there already, and the Lord Chancellor has it in his satchel.
I did not know that.
We're learning a lot. We're learning a lot. It's amazing to see the effort and the detail that is put into this, that has been formed over so many decades and centuries before. But the political backdrop to this one, Beth, does feel quite unique.
As I said earlier, I mean, I really did take a beat this morning because typically I would have spent days looking at the bills coming through, preparing for that, considering what were the things that would stand out in terms of the government agenda. We would be discussing the policies, the politics, what's the government trying to do over the next couple of years. And actually, from the local election disaster for the government into the leadership chaos that has engulfed the Labour Party and Keir Starmer, this King's Speech has barely been looked at, I would say, by Westminster, because everyone has been completely, in the Labour Party, just obsessing about what's going to happen with the Prime Minister, and that tells you a lot about the paralysis of this government right now.
And even for Keir Starmer, who has going into this big ceremonial occasion, and the kind of warm-up to this was Wes Streeting coming into Number 10 and having that extraordinary 16-minute meeting.
Yeah, and as I said earlier, this is a pause now on this running war over Keir Starmer's future between different parts of the Labour Party. No one wants to put the King in an awkward position. I think Wes Streeting knows very well that to in any way distract from King Charles would be considered unforgivable. And so we have this pause now. But as I said, I think later in the Commons, it will really ramp up again because Keir Starmer will be there addressing MPs in this very, very febrile atmosphere.
Do you want to just pick up and talk about what is happening right now? We can see, of course, the scene of the royal carriage carrying the King, and also, of course, preparations being made in the House of Lords as well.
Yes, and as with all of these ceremonial events, there's lots of concurrent activity going on. So we've seen the crown and the symbols of state being delivered to the Palace of Westminster. They are now in the robing room awaiting the arrival of the King. We can see in the picture there the King's procession crossing Horse Guards Parade, so only a few minutes away from the Palace of Westminster. And then at the same time, there are the other senior officials who form part of the state procession in the Palace of Westminster. They themselves are now processing, as you can see, down the steps to the grand entrance, to the Sovereign's entrance, to be ready to greet the King. And the ceremony starts from there. You can also see in the picture the doorkeepers, House of Lords doorkeepers. I always say they're the unsung heroes in Blackrod's department. Blackrod currently General Ed Davies, and the doorkeepers, they're the people who are responsible for access and order around the House of Lords chamber itself. And they're part of the daily ceremonial that goes on. I by coincidence, spoke to one of the House of Lords doorkeepers yesterday afternoon, and he said, "Can't speak to you now because we're just in the final throes of a rehearsal." And of course, it is the case that all these things are rehearsed so that the image of the country, which goes out on global television, is presented of one where there is order, despite the political chaos around it.
Yeah, Beth, that's one of those rehearsals that you walked into in Westminster earlier this week when you were saying how you saw the sort of rehearsal sort of taking place, and I guess it just really underlines how much preparation goes into this. I mean, you must be very, very aware of this in your former role as Black Rod.
Seven years as Black Rod and organising lots of state occasions and state openings of Parliament. And every time it's different. Sometimes, you know, the Queen wasn't going to be well, and so somebody else would come, and then the weather has a bearing on it, and then one of the key things is the protocol around this, the guest list. There are some 2,000 people who are guests who come to watch and sit in the Royal Gallery and in the galleries around the House of Lords chamber. And the guest list is quite a contentious area about who's allowed to invite who. Obviously, the politicians have prime call on who is invited as guests. But a very important part of the guest list is the diplomatic corps, so representatives from other countries, and they actually. A selection of them, not all of them, but a selection of them actually sit in the House of Lords chamber. Don't often get television coverage on them. I hope we'll see them. But you have in the chamber the peers in their red robes, some bishops, and then members of the judiciary who don't sit in the House of Lords normally, but they're part of the state occasion because they represent part of the state establishment. And also members of the diplomatic corps, so high commissioners and ambassadors from other countries, who come and sit and take part in the ceremony. And for them, it's a great privilege, and there's a rota by which each ambassador is invited, because out of all the embassies in the capital, they can only have a few each year who come. But those seats are really sought after. And that sort of soft power, I suppose, soft element to our country's projection of itself through ambassadors to their own home countries is a very important element of this. And I wouldn't call it pantomime, it was a pageantry, I think is a better word. Pantomime rather refers to perhaps the politics, and pageantry refers to the constitutional elements here.
It's worth also just kind of, I guess, pausing and reflecting on how much detail there is and how much thought into all of these moments. The Diamond Jubilee State Coach, currently carrying the monarch, the King and Queen, has air conditioning and electric windows. Extraordinary levels of detail that perhaps I wasn't aware of necessarily. So you have the modernity with the tradition all in one.
Some modernity, though, isn't it? Pulled by horses. But I suppose that's green power. At least it's not electrically powered. But actually, you mentioned detail. There's a point of detail here which, once again, this is a sort of a pageantry day for the Palace of Westminster. You know, when you have, I don't know, graduation day at universities or prize-giving days at schools, and trooping the colour, and these ceremonies that take place in every village and institution in the country, they all involve some sort of party atmosphere and lift the spirits. And the same is in the Palace of Westminster. There's a great febrile sense of celebration and commemoration at the state opening of Parliament. And some of the people who really take great pride in it, and really take pride in it, are the housekeepers in the Palace of Westminster. You wouldn't believe the level of inspection, not least by Black Rod, who inspects the whole of the Palace of Westminster the night before, and indeed on the morning. And I remember when I was Black Rod, having to hustle one of the housekeepers out of the Royal Gallery because she spotted some dirt marks on one of the carpets, and so rushed in with a hoover and a brush to clean it up, and that was minutes before the sovereign was due to arrive. And they take great pride in making sure that the Palace of Westminster is immaculately turned out as one of the status symbols that sets the values and standards of this country. And I think, you know, if you ask them, they really look forward to the state opening because it's an opportunity for the public to see inside the Palace of Westminster and the standards which they maintain for our politicians.
I mean, you mentioned before the level of preparation, the rehearsals, that the weather comes into it. I mean, it's a pretty gloomy day today, I have to say. They're not going to need the air conditioning in that coach, are they? Does it really affect things that much? Should we see the umbrellas getting out later, do you think?
The weather never affects these things. We're typical Brits. The show must go on. And that was one of the great things in the contingency planning when we were planning these state events, and we'd have meetings, big meetings with the Metropolitan Police, security services, the Buckingham Palace staff, or the Palace of Westminster staff. And at these big meetings, one of the principal underlying themes was whatever happens, the show must go on. And we must not be destabilised by an event or the weather.
You can see there King Charles and Queen Camilla arriving for the state opening of Parliament.
And they're greeted at the Palace of Westminster by the Earl Marshal, the Duke of Norfolk, who is responsible for state events. It's an honorary, unpaid post and a hereditary one, which the Duke of Norfolk always has. And he is always accompanied by the Lord Great Chamberlain, Lord Carrington, another similar post, a hereditary post. They greet him. You can see nearest you in the picture the Duke of Norfolk with his small baton, and beyond him, Lord Carrington, the Lord Great Chamberlain, carrying a white wand, like a white snooker cue, some might say.
And they are proceeding from the Sovereign's entrance, where they enter the House of Lords, so the Royal Standard raised, and then they're going up the Sovereign's staircase.
Having come in through the Sovereign's entrance, they then follow this state procession. We see here the heralds known as the officers of arms, not of military arms, but of heraldic arms, the officers of arms. These are the two Palace Sergeant-at-Arms. Then you have on the left Garter King of Arms and Black Rod, followed by the Lord Chancellor.
David Lammy.
David Lammy there. Then the Duke of Norfolk, Lord Carrington, the Earl Marshal and the Lord Great Chamberlain.
Busy week for David Lammy, who's been making calls on behalf of the Prime Minister, trying to shore up support in the early part of the week, and now involved in the most important moment of pageantry and politics, really, is the government's legislative programme laid out in the King's speech.
What we see now is the procession splits. The King and the Queen go to the robing room. The doors are closed in the robing room, whilst the King will put on the state robes and the imperial state crown. Meanwhile, in the Royal Gallery, the state procession will assemble facing the doors of the Royal Gallery, and in a few moments the state trumpeters will sound a, a call, and that will indicate that the sovereign is emerging from the robing room wearing the crown. The state procession will then all turn about and they'll set off towards the House of Lords.
And then it will all happen.
And then it happens.
Talk to me about the maces as well. We haven't spoken about them yet. They have quite an important symbolic role.
A lot of people think that there is only one mace, you know, one for the House of Commons, one for the House of Lords. A mace is a symbol in the Palace of Westminster for both chambers of royal authority, the sovereign's authority. And this is the importance of state opening. It is the authority of the sovereign for Parliament to assemble and pass legislation. And when the chambers assemble each day for their business in the House of Lords and the House of Commons, the maces are ceremoniously processed with their respective speakers into the chambers and are placed in the House of Commons on the table in front of the Speaker, and in the House of Lords on the woolsack in front of the Speaker of the Lord Speaker. And once the maces are in place, that is the symbol of the sovereign's authority, that parliamentary business may then proceed. But there are other maces, and maces have always been traditionally symbols of authority, sometimes royal authority, often royal authority. So there are maces in council chambers up and down the country. In fact, there isn't just one mace in the House of Lords. I think there are three, and if one's away for cleaning or repair, one of the others can be used. They are symbols. They're not necessarily completely unique.
And so what we're looking at here, so that is the cap of maintenance, is that right?
So the cap of maintenance is traditionally carried by the, now I'm going to have to get this right, the leader of the House of Lords, who is Baroness Smith. And the cap of maintenance, that's the cap of maintenance. The sword of state is carried by a former Chief of the Defence, and that, in this case, is Air Chief Marshal Stu Peach.
The Queen, we're expecting Her Majesty Queen Camilla to wear the George IV state diadem. And I was interested to read that Queen Elizabeth actually started wearing this in place of the imperial state crown from 2019. So it's a smaller kind of crown,
and one of the key things, it's lighter.
Lighter, this is exactly.
And on one occasion when the Queen came to the state opening of Parliament, she didn't wear a crown at all, because, again, you know, when she was in her 90s, that was, you know, wearing that crown and that weight on her head and reading the speech for a long period of time was physically very demanding. So the crown was, in fact, carried in front of her by the Lord Great Chamberlain. As we watch now, you can see the state trumpeters outside the doors to the to the robing room, and they will sound the fanfare. At the other end of the Palace of Westminster, the House of Commons is assembling for its business. The Speaker enters the House of Commons in a procession led by the Sergeant-at-Arms carrying the House of Commons mace.
Hats off, strangers!
And the Speaker is accompanied, led by the Sergeant-at-Arms and accompanied by his private secretary and also by the Speaker's chaplain. Here is the Sergeant-at-Arms of the Mace, Sir Lindsay Hoyle, the Speaker, the Speaker's chaplain, and the Speaker's private secretary.
Hats off, strangers. That is explain to us what's going on there. This is all part of the tradition.
It is part of the tradition that nobody should come to the house in disguise. So hats off, strangers, so that everyone could be recognised. And as a mark of respect, of course, that everybody should remove their headgear as the Speaker and the mace, which is the sovereign's authority for the House of Commons chamber, passes through those public parts of the House of Commons.
So we're seeing now the procession going through now.
The Speaker's procession, he enters the House of Commons, and the next thing that happens in the House of Commons after the mace is placed on the table, Sir Lindsay Hoyle, the Speaker, will take his place in the chair, and then the cameras will be switched off, the doors will be closed, and the Speaker's chaplain will say prayers.
Everything going
and
according
then the cameras, if you can see, has switched to the House of Lords.
Because of that moment of prayer, which is a private moment.
It's a private moment. And in 1622, the Black Rod arrived at the House of Commons door too early, and the House of Commons hadn't finished their prayers and sent him away. There was another reason they sent him away, actually, and that was he wasn't carrying his black rod, which is his symbol of the Crown's authority.
So quite a few mistakes made there, then, to be honest.
Oh, it was back in the day.
Wouldn't have happened in your day.
It's certainly not, no. And it's one of the reasons why the door is slammed in the face of Black Rod. Since then, the House of Commons has said, we don't want Black Rod coming before we're ready, and we will let him in when we are ready, even though Black Rod is the sovereign's messenger. And this is part of the theatre, the House of Commons expressing and demonstrating through the slamming of the doors in the face of the sovereign's messenger, Black Rod. It's a demonstration of their political independence of the Crown, and that is the tradition of slamming the door.
Which is important, and I guess it kind of just demonstrates, you know, those democratic rights that in this country have been fought for many centuries.
And people need to have that explained because, as I was saying earlier, the state opening of Parliament, it isn't just pantomime, it is pageantry, but it's symbolic of our very stable, solid constitution, which underpins, as a solid foundation, the political turmoil that we can go through.
But I guess it's also a moment of, you know, you look at the resplendor, the crown, the carriage, the military pageantry around the monarch, and yet the real power, the person writing the speech, the person making the laws, is the Prime Minister and the government.
Exactly. And I think that when you talk to almost anybody in public about, say, what's the one thing you want out of a government, and the one thing they want is stability and continuity and certainty. That's what everybody wants in their lives, above all else. And if politicians can't provide it, then I think it's important that the state is able to demonstrate that the institutions around politics is itself stable. The King and Queen have emerged from the royal robing room, having put on the state robes and their crowns. And this is the state procession proceeding through the royal gallery. And either side of the procession, you can see guests who've been invited. These are guests from foreign countries, guests of MPs and peers, and of the palace, private and public guests, as it were, who've come to witness this really unique, globally unique ceremony.
And you can see some of the children behind as well.
These are the pages, pages for the King and the Queen. They're partly ceremonial, but they also have a functional role. and I hope we'll see it later, but the Queen the Queen Elizabeth had a long train behind her state robe, and the pages carried that. And then when she was seated, or before she was seated on the throne, they would arrange the robe so that it wouldn't encumber her.
So you can see there the monarch entering the House of Lords chamber. The MPs, of course, won't be allowed in until King Charles is ready and is given the signal for that.
So what happens next, I hope we'll hear it, is you can see the pages carrying the train behind the King, and similarly the Queen, and the pages with their role of arranging that and then clearing out of the way, taking their places.
My lords, pray be seated.
If you watch the King now, he will turn towards the Lord Great Chamberlain and nod. He's just nodded, I think. The Lord Great Chamberlain raises his wand, and that is the signal for Black Rod, who is some 50 yards away in central lobby, to turn around and progress, is the word for it, to the House of Commons chamber, where the door will be slammed in his face.
And explain why the door will be slammed.
So the door is slammed in his face by the House of Commons as a demonstration of the House of Commons' political independence of the Crown, that they will do the Crown's bidding, but in their own time. And also they want to make sure that it is the sovereign's messenger and not an imposter. So they close the door. The little grille on the right, the Sergeant-at-Arms looks through the grille and calls out, "It is Black Rod," and the doors are opened. Black Rod enters the chamber and then commands the House of Commons to attend His Majesty the King in the House of Lords chamber.
Mr. Speaker, the King commands this noble House to attend His Majesty immediately in the House of Peers.
The Sergeant-at-Arms leads the House of Commons procession. The Speaker and Black Rod lead off with the clerk and the private secretary.
I always love that image as well. If you see Keir Starmer walking along with Kemi Badenoch as well after...
So the two front benches join together and walk up together. And this is one of the interesting things about this procession. It goes quite slowly as another mark of, some people call it disrespect to the sovereign, but it is another demonstration of the MPs and the House of Commons independence from political independence of the Crown. You saw there Sir Edward Lee and Diane Abbott, who were respectively the father and mother of the Houses, in other words, the longest-serving MPs.
You always look at the body language in these moments as well, and, you know, often some leaders clearly won't talk at all, they'll have be stony-faced. Kemi Badenoch and Keir Starmer looking a little bit more relaxed together, although it does look like she's doing most of the talking, which is perhaps not surprising given the week he's had there.
I always find this a fascinating moment, and it used to amuse me rather, because Jeremy Corbyn, do you remember, and Boris Johnson could not stand each other.
They couldn't look at each other.
And Boris Johnson would sort of talk at Jeremy Corbyn, and Jeremy Corbyn would just be absolutely no expression on his face, just eyes forward.
There's Wes Streeting as well.
And there's Wes Streeting. There is Wes Streeting.
I imagine James Cleverly next to him is going to be trying to...
I have to say as well, there's been a report there's been a report in the Times saying that Wes Streeton's allies say he's preparing to resign tomorrow. And I can tell you that an ally of Wes Streeton has also told me that he is preparing to resign tomorrow. But that is Wes Streeton's allies at the moment. And Wes Streeton's, let me just find it, Wes Streeton's spokesperson has said at the moment Wes is the Health Secretary, proud of his record of falling waiting lists and recovering NHS. He's not planning to say anything following his meeting with the Prime Minister that might distract from the King's speech. But just to confirm that I have also been told by someone that Wes Streeton is planning to resign tomorrow. As I said, it's only one source.
But this is, I guess this just brings into sharp relief what we've been saying. You know, this is a reprieve. This is a moment when it's acting almost as a fire break. But as soon as this is over, we are back to the pure politics. And it's very unclear at the minute where that's going to lead.
But we should really pause on the politics for now and watch this.
So this is the moment where the Lord Chancellor, David Lammy, hands the King his speech from his satchel. There will be some comments about this, that he had to walk backwards, which is never
members of the House
a requirement.
Of Commons. An increasingly dangerous and volatile world threatens the United Kingdom, with the conflict in the Middle East only the most recent example. Every element of the nation's energy, defence and economic security will be tested. My government will respond to this world with strength and aim to create a country that is fair for all. My ministers will take decisions that protect the energy, defence and economic security of the United Kingdom for the long term. They will defend the British values of decency, tolerance and respect for difference under our common flag. And they will harness the potential of the pride felt across this country for its communities. My government will take urgent action to tackle anti-Semitism and ensure all communities feel safe. My government believes that the United Kingdom's economic security depends on raising living standards in every part of the United Kingdom. My ministers will support measures that maintain stability and control the cost of living. They will use public investment to shape markets and attract further private investment. They will deploy the power of an active state in partnership with business and enable reforms that support higher growth and a fair deal for working people. My government believes that improved trading relations are vital for the United Kingdom's economic security, for significantly raising economic growth and for lowering prices for working people. My ministers will introduce legislation to take advantage of new trading opportunities, including a bill to strengthen ties with the European Union. My government will also support the economic security of British businesses. Legislation will be introduced to tackle late payments and to reduce the burden of unnecessary regulation through innovation. The United Kingdom's economic security depends upon world-class infrastructure. Legislation will be introduced to unlock the benefits of airport expansion, enable roads to be built at pace, including the Lower Thames crossing, and deliver a fair deal for the north of England through Northern Powerhouse Rail. My ministers will continue to take all action necessary to safeguard the domestic production of steel. My government will also improve the United Kingdom's security by continuing to invest in the renewal of public services. My ministers will push forward with significant reforms to the police, the National Health Service, and to the criminal justice system to help them deliver services the British people expect. Legislation will be introduced to increase confidence in the security of the immigration and asylum systems. My government will improve critical infrastructure with legislation to clean up the water industry and establish Great British Railways. My government believes that the United Kingdom should be a country fair for all and a place where every child is included in the nation's highest aspirations. My ministers believe that every child deserves the chance to succeed to the best of his or her ability and not be held back due to poverty, special educational needs, or a lack of respect for vocational education. My ministers will continue to invest in apprenticeships and measures that tackle youth unemployment. They will respond to the Milburn Review and the Timms Review and continue to reform the welfare system to support both young and disabled people to flourish in work as the basis for long-term economic security. A bill will be brought forward to raise standards in schools and introduce generational reforms of the special educational needs system. My ministers will also proceed with the introduction of digital ID that will modernize how citizens interact with public services. Alongside strong public services and a strong economy, the highest standards of trust in public office are essential for the social contract and the United Kingdom's collective security. My government will introduce the Hillsborough Law to bring forward a duty of candour for public servants. My ministers will also introduce legislation to enable peerages to be removed. My government will bring forward proposals that strengthen the delivery, accountability, innovation, and productivity of the civil service. These proposals will also seek to safeguard its impartiality and core values to enhance trust and confidence in the institutions of government. My government will bring forward a bill to speed up remediation for people living in homes with unsafe cladding and a draft bill to ban abusive conversion practices. In this volatile world, my government will continue to pursue foreign policy based on a calm assessment of the national interest. It will continue its unflinching support for the brave people of Ukraine who fight on the front line of freedom. My ministers will seek to improve relations with European partners as a vital step in strengthening European security. It will continue to promote long-term peace in the Middle East and the two-state solution in Israel and Palestine. My government will also uphold the United Kingdom's unbreakable commitment to NATO and our NATO allies, including through a sustained increase in defence spending. My government will seek to reinforce the long-term energy, defence and economic security of the United Kingdom as an essential component of strength on the world stage. This will include housing, which can be a source of insecurity for many people. My ministers will bring forward legislation to increase long-term investment in social housing and to reform the leasehold system, including the capping of ground rents. My government will introduce legislation to tackle the growing threat from foreign state entities and their proxies. They will respond to the horrific attack in Southport with measures to protect the British people from extreme violence and honour the victims, the injured and their families. My ministers will also introduce legislation to improve the country's defences against cybersecurity threats. My government will support our gallant armed forces and their families who make considerable personal sacrifices for the collective security and freedom of everyone in the United Kingdom. My ministers will recognise this service with an armed forces bill that improves the service justice system and establishes the Armed Forces Covenant in statute. My ministers believe that energy independence must be a long-term goal of national security and that the nation's energy security requires long-term investment and reform, as demonstrated by recent events in the Middle East. Increased production of clean British energy will help to ensure that enemies of the United Kingdom cannot attack the economic security of the British people. My ministers will therefore introduce an energy independence bill to scale up homegrown renewable energy and protect living standards for the long term. My ministers will also take forward recommendations of the nuclear regulatory review and encourage a new era of British nuclear energy generation. My government will remain a leading advocate for tackling climate change and achieving a world free from poverty. The United Kingdom will also take action to reduce humanitarian need and conflict around the world. My ministers will champion the rights of women and girls to live in a world free from violence. This will include promoting women's full economic and political participation within their societies, with agency over the decisions that impact their lives. Next year, the United Kingdom will take on the G20 presidency and host the G20 summit to drive global growth and reinforce global stability, which is essential for the prosperity of working people across the country. My government is committed to the strength and integrity of the Union of the United Kingdom and will continue to work closely with the devolved governments to deliver for citizens across the whole of the nation. Members of the House of Commons, estimates for the public services will be laid before you. My Lords and members of the House of Commons, other measures will be laid before you. I pray that the blessing of Almighty God may rest upon your councils.
The King's speech there from the monarch, saying that the government will support measures to control the cost of living in what the King, in a speech, of course, written by the government, warned of a dangerous and volatile world. Other measures included legislation to allow the UK to move closer to the European Union, more investment in police, the NHS and the justice system, and legislation too to be able to strip lords of peerages more easily. So just some of the measures there announced by the King in the speech just delivered there to members of both houses of Parliament. Let's bring in Beth Rigby, shall we? It's in some ways an incredibly unusual setting for this speech, given the backdrop of the current Parliament, given the fact we don't know if the Prime Minister is still going to be around to deliver all these measures, but an important legislative moment as well.
It's an important legislative moment. It's the government agenda for the next parliamentary session. bills on immigration, on educational reform, closer ties with Europe. But a lot missing, and as David pointed out earlier when we were chatting, nothing big on defence, nothing big on welfare reform. Some of those thornier areas for the government completely ignored. But I have to also say that as this was going on, the Times had reported that Wes Streeting was preparing to resign tomorrow as the Health Secretary. And I can also say that I have also been told by an ally, a close ally of Wes Streeting, that they expect the Health Secretary to resign tomorrow. Now, Wes Streeting's team have repeatedly said he will not say anything to distract from the King's speech, but it seems that he has not been able to control what is coming out. And as I said, I have been told by one person familiar with Wes Streeting's thinking that he is preparing to resign tomorrow. Have you got...
I was just going to mention that in the last few seconds, Wes Streeting has just tweeted, not to say he's going to resign, I should say. He's just said, under Labour, NHS waiting lists are falling, ambulances are arriving faster, there are more GPs and higher patient satisfaction, lots done, lots to do. The health bill will boost the impact of our investment and modernisation. So a tweet there from Wes, not referencing any of the drama behind the scenes, focusing in on his role as Health Secretary and the legislation announced by the King when it comes to the department that he's responsible for.
I have to say as well, this has been rumbling for the last 12 hours overnight in Westminster. There was a view amongst many allies of Keir Starmer last night that they had done enough, that they had seen off Wes Streeting, that there had been those ministerial resignations for people and that had petered out. And their view was Wes Streeting did not have the numbers. Now, when I spoke to some allies of Wes Streeting last night, they said that was not true. They said that Wes did have the support. And I have to say, although I did not report it, I was left with the impression that this was a very much a live conversation about what Wes Streeting would or wouldn't do. He has been in to see the Prime Minister this morning. The meeting must have lasted a matter of maybe 10 to 12 minutes, given the time in and out that we timestamped watching him go in the door and out of the door. And as I said, I have been told by one of his allies he is preparing to resign tomorrow. This was first reported by two very well plugged-in journalists in the Times, Aubrey Allegretti and Patrick Maguire, first reporting this news. And as I said, they must have some sources on it, and I also have a source on that, but we have no confirmation yet. That's as much as we know.
It was Lyndon B. Johnson who said the first rule of politics is being able to count, and we're going to find out now, in the next few days, which team has done their sums right, because as Beth said, there's different messaging coming from both teams. Number 10 effectively saying that they don't have their numbers, they feel more secure with Keir Starmer in that post. Allies of Wes Streeting, effectively, there should be a pinch of salt with all that. We're going to find out.
Look, and also yesterday in the Cabinet, and I'm sorry because everyone's tuning in to watch the King's speech, and we are having a different conversation as MPs are milling around and getting ready to go back to the House of Commons, where MPs will now discuss and debate this King's speech. And we will see the Prime Minister in action and Kemi Badenoch, and we'll be looking to see where Wes Streeting will sit or stand in that chamber. But look, the Prime Minister at Cabinet yesterday morning said to his Cabinet, a leadership ballot has not been triggered. You need 81 MPs to trigger a contest. He said the process has not begun. It's not been triggered. And as such, we are going to carry on with governing and get on with governing. And that's what I am doing, and I expect my Cabinet to do. And really, he was throwing down the gauntlet to a would-be challenger. And now, really, it does remain to be seen whether Wes Streeting will try and trigger that challenge in the next few days.
I just want to bring in David Leakey at this point as well. Can you remember another King's speech, Queen's speech, with a backdrop such as this?
No, I don't think one that was quite so volatile in terms of the internal politics of particularly the Labour Party. Although, having said that, we've had so many internal dramas. I mean, is it 6 prime ministers in the last 10 years? And some of those did coincide with state openings of Parliament and a change of government. So I think this is...
the new norm, maybe.
The new norm and more of the same. I go back to something I made a comment earlier. I think people in the country, have many concerns. Lots of people are worried about the cost of living. Lots of people are worried about special education needs, waiting lists in the NHS, albeit that's improving, the finances of the country, the appalling, woeful state of readiness of the defences, both the military defences and the civil contingency defence for this country. These are really big issues. In Russia, the debate there is between welfare and warfare. The Russian people are really worried that so much money is being spent, so much treasure being spent on warfare. There isn't enough on welfare. And there's an undercurrent of dissatisfaction developing amongst the Russian population. I think the same is happening in this population here, where people, particularly in the commentators, are worried that so much is being spent on welfare and so little spent on warfare that we have the opposite problem here, but it is a developing one. And as I see it, the issue which the Labour Party has been wrestling with ever since they won the general election and came into power is the balance of priority on expenditure. And every time Keir Starmer has tried to get that balance right, he has been undermined by the backbenchers who say, no, you can't do that. And the welfare is winning over the warfare. And it's not just welfare and warfare, there are other priorities too. But I think that sums up the problem that Keir Starmer's had. And whoever takes over, if there is a leadership challenge and it's a successful one, whoever takes over is going to be confronted by the same political division within the Labour Party, and that is the picking of the priority for expenditure of national treasure. And if we go on expending on welfare and pensions in the way that we have, we will not be able to expend on investment in our infrastructure and growth and the defence, the proper defence of our country. And those are the big issues. And I think if we could just get the political commentariat, I mean, this is a voter speaking here to Beth and others, get the commentators away from the personalities and onto those big issues.
I would like to come back on that because there's actually been a lot of debate around, and you would have seen it on social media about this, about political commentators and reporters focusing on the politics, not the substance. But we're only actually following what's happening in the Labour Party. I also think there are massive issues in this country that the public want to be discussed. The issue is that we can't get to that because there is constant pandemonium at the moment within the Labour Party about Keir Starmer, and it's just muddying the water in terms of trying to get on with talking about how they are governing. And it's interesting because I think actually Keir Starmer himself, in the speeches I go to, talks quite often about the frustration he feels that he wants to get on to talking about those issues, but he is constantly being battered about at the moment by what's happening politically in his party.
The other thing that I would also just throw into the mix, since we're having this kind of round-the-table discussion of these really important issues that have been thrown up by the King's Speech and the legislation of the government, is that there has been a timidity, I would say, of politicians to really grapple with some of these issues and to make an argument. When I interview politicians, I think they are worried about saying the wrong thing, about planting a foot wrong, and so they don't go in there and make an argument for things they believe in for fear of upsetting a proportion of the electorate. And if you look at the state of the country and all the areas you've listed, from defence to welfare to special needs, I think that there is, I guess, a genuine need for braver political leadership from all sides on this.
And one of the things that seems to be absent are what people describe as the big beasts of politics, who can get out there and really present these issues and make the commentariat, the politicians and the public aware of them, that those are the big issues and not some of the, albeit important, but more peripheral issues, and pick those priorities in a more substantive way. And the problem is that it's great listening to Vox Pop interviews. You hear what people want and what's important to them, cost of living, waiting lists and so on. But Vox Pop doesn't necessarily get or is sensitised to those big issues, which is the cost of government borrowing, 100 billion a year. And we have to borrow to fund some of these things. The lack of investment in our infrastructure, which is frustrating growth. The lack of investment in defence, which is making our country vulnerable and weak.
I just want to talk through what is happening right now. The conclusion of the speech, the King and Queen processing back through the Royal Gallery, of course, to the robing room, and then conducted back to the state carriage there by the Earl Marshal and the Lord Great Chamberlain, leaving the Palace of Westminster. Our schedules told us around 12, so it looks like they are absolutely bang on time there.
Yes, and there will be a... there won't be a sigh of relief yet, but certainly inside the Palace of Westminster there will be a sigh of relief that the state opening has gone well. I don't think I saw any flaws in it. I'll hope I'll have lunch one day soon with, or dinner with Ed Davis Blackrod, and he and I will discuss it. There were one or two small points, not of his making, but which in next year's rehearsals might need a bit of tweaking.
What have you spotted somewhere? What were you going to say?
I'm not going to wear them in public because they're very minor things, and but the cognoscenti will pick them up. It's rather like watching the trooping the colour. You know, you'd never say publicly what might or might not have gone better.
Politicians can get a bit of lessons from you, perhaps.
No, but politicians will always do what they say. It doesn't matter how well the rehearsals go. The politicians will forget on the day when they are asked to do their bit and do it slightly wrong. But no, actually, it went very well. Absolute congratulations to the Palace of Westminster staff, to Blackrod and the team and everybody there involved in preparing and rehearsing this. It's gone really well. And
as they depart, we just saw the flag there, I think, the Royal Standard lowered and replaced with a Union flag. This is all part of the symbolism.
Yes, on the Palace of Westminster, on the opposite end to where the Elizabeth Tower in Big Ben is, there's the Victoria Tower, the bigger of the towers on the Palace of Westminster. That is the tower which has the Palace of Westminster flagpole on it. Every day of the year, the Union flag is flown from there, except when the sovereign is in the Palace of Westminster. And when he arrives, the Union flag is broken, the sovereign's flag is broken out, and the Union flag is lowered, and then the reverse procedure. And as the King left the Palace of Westminster, the sovereign's flag will have been lowered and the Union Jack broken out again. Union flag, I should say.
So now, I guess, is the work of the King now done?
The work of the King is now done. Three small things. He's got to get back to the palace safely. That's one thing. He then has to release the hostage. There's one MP who is always taken from the Palace of Westminster and held hostage in Buckingham Palace.
So the hostage now in Buckingham Palace.
Buckingham Palace. And when the King is safely back in the palace, then the House of Commons can have their MP back, the hostage
cream
back.
tea as you're being given held hostage. I love that idea. You're held in Buckingham Palace having
what
cream tea as a hostage.
Beth,
I'd sign up for that.
Yes,
would
that's
you?
Great.
The rumour is that it's an alcoholic drink.
Oh,
really?
Gin and tonic. Now you're talking.
Very much. It is the Buckingham Palace hospitality is always impeccable.
I'd love to be held hostage. Can you just take me there now? Hold me hostage.
Nice glass of red wine. After the week we've had that, I think it'd go down quite well. Is it the King who lets him out himself or someone else?
No, it's not. But I think once the King is back, then the hostage is released. And then the final acts, which you can see on the television now, are the regalia, the crown regalia, the state regalia now being returned to from the Palace of Westminster in the reverse process, the crown, the cap and maintenance, the sword of state being taken down to the sovereign's entrance and put back in the carriage and returned to Buckingham Palace. And when all of that is done, Blackrod and the staff will breathe a huge sigh of relief.
And there's still a bit of parliamentary business, of course, to get through as well. We'll have the motion of thanks to His Majesty, known as the humble address. That's later today. That is later today, and traditionally in both chambers, in the House of Lords and the House of Commons, the opening interventions on both sides are generally light-hearted, as Hilary Benn will well know. May have even delivered one of the light-hearted
remarks in his time.
That was beautifully done, I should say. Some lovely bit of TV choreography here, because as we've been speaking, we've been joined by the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland, Hilary Benn. The banter address, as some people kind of colloquially call it in Westminster, because of the light-hearted tone.
Well, there have been some very, very good speeches over the years that I've had the pleasure of listening to.
I'm just imagining you doing banter. Is it?
Not quite my thing, but anyway. I think that the best was David Lanning. He said, I've got a school report, and it said, David is a model pupil. Unfortunately, he is not a working model. And the entire house collapsed in laughter. It was
very good. That's very good.
I guess at the minute, is it fair to say that MPs need a bit of light relief, particularly on the Labour Party?
Well, I think we all need to take a deep breath. Last Thursday and Friday was very difficult, and I get why colleagues are angry and upset and worried, but we've got a job of work to do. And if you look at this in its historic context, we don't often get the opportunity as the Labour Party to form a government, to introduce the second King's Speech has just happened today. And in the end, the public will judge us by what we do, what we deliver, the change we make to the country. That's what we promised just under 2 years ago, and that's what the Prime Minister's determined to make happen.
I guess the problem is the public have sent a message, haven't they? You say that the public judge you on what you do.
Yeah.
That is what happened last week. There was a judgment, right? In the local councils in England, but in also parliamentary elections too, right, in Scotland and Wales.
Yeah, but we've been here before, and that's why remembering history is really quite important. Think of the number of seats that Tony Blair lost in 1999. Look at the wipeout of Labour in local government as way back as 1968. The fact is, sitting governments have a hard time in local elections, including national elections. It's how you respond to that. Do you listen to what the voters have been telling you? And the real judgment will be in 3 and a bit years' time.
You were in Cabinet yesterday.
Yes.
Because I yelled at you when you came
You
out.
didn't yell
come
at me,
over.
did you? I'm very sorry. I hope that wasn't
devastated.
unfair.
Yeah, you didn't talk
We've got you now, though. No, seriously. I mean, how was it in Cabinet yesterday?
Well, the Prime Minister said, I think, has been briefed out. There's a process, and it hasn't been triggered, and we're getting on with the job. And then we talked about the crisis in the Middle East, the impact it's having on families, the cost of filling up a car, food prices. And this is a really serious time. This is a really serious time. And the thing about Keir Starmer, and I've known him a long time, is that he takes his responsibilities very seriously. Look at how he has transformed Britain's reputation in the world. Now, we don't have to have very long memories to go back to the chaos of the last government, a government which signed international agreements with no intention of honouring them at all. People looked at Britain and said, what is going on? And Keir Starmer, building that relationship with the American president, saved Jaguar Land Rover. And the workers there know that it was his intervention that did that, helping to lead to support Ukraine in the war that it is facing and trying to de-escalate the current crisis in the Gulf, which is the single most important thing we can do to get those prices down again.
Since we've been on air, there are reports that West Streeting told Keir Starmer today that he is going to launch a formal leadership contest and that he's going to resign. Do you know what happened in that meeting?
No.
But have you not asked Number 10, you know, given the fact that, you know, this is... this is an important thing to say because the King is just setting out the legislative programme of the government.
Yes.
And if an hour before someone says that they're going to launch a leadership contest, that feels like quite important information for you to have, no? Do you have no idea?
Well, look, over the last 5 days, oh, gosh, I've read a lot of things in the papers. A lot of things have been reported. And
that's why we're hoping someone like you can tell us what's happening.
Well, I think we just have to take things as they come. As the Prime Minister said yesterday, there is a process and it hasn't been triggered. And in order to trigger it, someone has to get 81 nominations. I mean, we'll have to see what unfolds. But the Prime Minister has my full support because he's got a job of work to do. And I really don't think that the British public would thank us if we turn in on ourselves as a result of what happened last Thursday. We have to listen to what they said. We have to reflect. But we've seen this before. And we've seen this before very, very recently. And the British public doesn't like it if you say, well, you're now going to have an argument amongst yourselves, rather than applying your minds to the task at hand, which is to make life better for us.
I have been told by a Streeton ally, as the King was delivering the speech, that he is preparing to resign tomorrow. I mean,
I don't know. We'll have to see what happens.
About that? Does it drive you nuts? Do you feel angry with him?
Look, my view is very clear. I think we should rally behind the Prime Minister. We should let him get on with doing his job, because he is a serious politician, and these are very, very serious times in which we love.
A serious politician?
Of course he's a serious politician, and look, he's played a very hugely important role in getting down the waiting list, which is one of the achievements of the government thus far. But I don't think, in my view, this is the moment for a leadership challenge. I think we should back the Prime Minister, and I will remain of that view. And I would say to my colleagues, think about what really matters for the future of the country. And we're less than 2 years in. Less than 2 years in. We've made a start. We've got a lot more to do. Let's get on with the task.
What's the message that Labour needs to do now from yourself? Because, look, you went into an election promising change, and me and Beth spent a lot of time going around during that election campaign, talking to people, and that's the thing that kept coming up again, that Labour hasn't delivered the change. And you listen to the King's speech there. There's material in it, but is it radical change?
Oh, I think taking British Steel into public ownership is pretty radical. The Energy Independence Bill, I mean, honestly, if we've learned anything from what's happened in the last just under 2 months, what happened 4 years ago, go right back to what happened in 1973, the oil price shock. Finally, I think we've all realised, we cannot continue to be dependent on oil and gas. And we are blessed. The British Isles are blessed with this natural resource that we can turn into energy. We're making really big progress on that, but we need to go further. And, legislation is often the nuts and bolts to deliver the change. In the end, the public will judge the change. They're not interested, of course, in what Clause 1 says and Clause 15 does, but it is a radical change. And to get those waiting lists down is an achievement. To increase the minimum wage is an achievement. To freeze the rail fares is an achievement. The rights for renters, a third of my constituents rent. And that change, so they're not now dependent on a landlord who might just decide, well, you're out because I fancy it. Those in time will be felt by a lot of people, and that is what we get judged on. That's why we do these jobs. That's why we are members of the Labour Party, because we have a responsibility to bring about change. But I get people are impatient, they're angry, their living standards haven't improved. And, they sent us a message last Thursday.
And Hilary, I've just pulled up the European Partnership Bill, because you mentioned the steel nationalisation legislation. This was something else the Prime Minister talked about on Monday, about wanting to reset with Europe and have closer ties. It says here, my ministers will introduce legislation to take advantage of new trading opportunities, including a bill to strengthen ties with the European Union. But look, if we cut to the chase on this, without really returning to the customs union or the single market, this is not massively radical, is it? It's tinkering around the edges.
I disagree.
If you want to be really radical and really transform the relationship with Europe and get proper growth again from that trading relationship, wouldn't you like, at least in the next manifesto, commitment to maybe return?
Well, you encouraged me to speculate on the contents of the next manifesto,
and kindly, though you imagine that? Kindly,
though you put the question, I'm not going to do that. But believe you me, if we can reach a deal, and the negotiations are going well, on a food and drink agreement with the European Union, think about it. Leaving the European Union meant we made trade with our biggest, nearest and most important trading partner more difficult. Was that good for economic growth? No, it was not. And now, my responsibility is, of course, in Northern Ireland. The negotiation of that food and drink agreement is hugely important to all of the political parties and farmers in Northern Ireland, because they can see the benefits for them. And, we're big in food and drink. It's one of the many things that we do really well as a country. And the fact that the Prime Minister has led in getting that agreement with the EU last year, we will have a summit before too long, and he's also said we want to build a closer relationship, and that makes a huge amount of economic sense. And the voices who say this is some betrayal, I don't think they're finding many people listening, because why would you not want to make trade with your biggest trading partners
and
easier?
In the details of the legislation, you're talking about the food and drink deal. The government is saying it could add up to £5 billion a year to the economy, and up to £9 billion when combined with the emissions trading agreement. This is something that the government wants to join.
Yeah.
We would have to pay into the EU, though, wouldn't we, to have these close... I mean, they're not just going to give us this stuff. Would you be prepared for the government to pay funds into the EU budgets in order to get some benefits back?
Well, it depends what the negotiations finally produce. But you take something like the Erasmus scheme. Now, we're already re-entering that, and that is a good thing. The Prime Minister's spoken about a youth mobility agreement with the EU to give young people from Britain opportunities to work in other European countries and European young people to come and work here. That, too, will bring economic benefit. In the end, all of this is a negotiation, all of this is a trade-off, and the question is, what do we gain from it for the economy and the British people, and is the price worth paying? And I think it's absolutely clear that a closer relationship with the EU is in our national economic interest, and that's what the Prime Minister said.
We know you've got to go. I've just got one more policy question for you on energy, as you said. You're effectively compelling the government to rally Parliament behind new legislation to ban new North Sea drilling licences. And I know we talked a lot about these drilling licences, but you have still had the power to grant them. Given the energy price shock, given the, I guess, rising calls for more energy independence, is this really the right move? It's not either or, is it? Should we not be investing in renewables, but not cutting off the...
Well, we're not cutting off, because oil and gas, as you know, will continue to contribute a lot to our energy security and our economy. But opening new fields will not reduce by 1 penny the cost of oil and gas and other fuel. It won't. It won't have any impact. Why? Because the price is set globally. And that is why reducing our dependence on oil and gas
and
increasing...
I'm aware the price is set globally, but, you look at the States, that they are on a very fast way to becoming effectively, energy independent, because they are allowing new drilling licences. It feels like we're going a different way to the rest of the world.
Well, we're trying to get away from the dependence. That's what Ed Miliband has said, and the Prime Minister, away from dependence, because as long as we continue to depend on oil and gas from other parts of the world, we're going to see these shocks hit us from time to time, and that's why it's absolutely the right policy to take advantage of the wealth of energy that we've got around our coasts.
We've got to let you go. Thank you very much.
But thank you. A pleasure to talk to you both.
To us today.
Great to have you in. Thank you.
We can see here the King arriving back at Buckingham Palace. Let's bring in our royal correspondent Laura Bundock for a final thought. That is the end of the King's official role, Laura. From a royal perspective, it's a very smooth King's speech indeed.
Yeah, I mean, it was an interesting speech. It's always interesting, I think, to reflect on his tone, because the tone of how he delivers the speech is something he has taken from his late mother, this deadpan delivery, they call it, a deadpan tone. So do you remember there was a lot of questioning when he performed this for the first time as king as to whether or not there would be emphasis on certain words. He was reading out something he particularly liked or didn't like. But of course, he knew from his mother that his role was a convention. This is a conventional role. It is his constitutional duty to open Parliament, and that's what he did. So there was no emotion from that speech, which was a stark contrast, I think, to the speech he gave 2 weeks ago in Congress. And just to remind you, you were talking about how someone from Parliament's held hostage. He referenced that in the speech to Congress a couple of weeks ago, telling everyone sat in Congress how they look after their guest rather well, to the point they often don't want to leave, saying to Mr. Speaker, are there any volunteers for that today? So that was his message to America. But as soon as the King arrives here, that MP will be released from captivity, where we understand they've been having a nice time and certainly offered, we think, a drink there. But the King performing his duty, as you'd expect. He doesn't write this speech, as we know. It is a speech drafted by government, setting out the government's plans. He won't be obviously debating or voting on that speech. And he does sit above politics. It always feels a bit of a paradox, doesn't it, to see him on such a huge political stage, but it is a pure reminder of his role here.